Arrival of the human warrior. In the dim twilight of the distant planet Oriel, the inhabitants of the peaceful village of Lyris went about their evening routines. Lyris was a quiet haven, hidden between rolling green hills and surrounded by forests that glistened under Oriel's two soft, golden moons. The village lived in harmony, tucked away from the dangers and excitement of the galaxy beyond. The people of Lyris were kind but cautious, cherishing simplicity and traditions that protected them from the unknown. Inside one of the small, humble homes, Relia and Joran sat across from each other, their expressions filled with worry. They were troubled about their daughter, Aria, who sat by the window, her bright eyes fixed on the stars above. Aria was unique in many ways, not only for her gentle spirit, but because of an injury that had left her with a physical disability. Her movements were slow, and her balance was delicate, yet her heart was unbreakable, always yearning for adventures beyond the familiar fields and forests. Will she ever find her place here? Relia whispered to Joran, her voice thick with worry. She dreams of the stars, but our life here, it's so quiet. I can see the sadness in her eyes. Joran gently took his wife's hand. Aria has a strength inside her. I believe the universe has a plan for her, something we cannot yet see. We must have faith. As if in answer to Joran's words, a strange commotion arose from outside their home. Startled, they turned toward the door, where the murmur of voices grew louder, and villagers called out in surprise and confusion. Relia and Joran exchanged an anxious look before moving toward the door to see what had disrupted their peaceful night. In the center of the village, a crowd had gathered around a figure lying on the ground, his form battered and motionless. Joran made his way through the throng of villagers, his eyes widening as he took in the sight before him, a human warrior, barely alive. The man's armor was worn and scarred, his face marked by battles fought across the galaxy. He had dark, tousled hair and a strong build, even in his weakened state. His presence alone was enough to awe the villagers, who had only heard legends of humans and their resilience. Relia gasped, placing her hand over her heart as she recognized the figure. Is it truly a human?" she whispered. The villagers, though cautious, felt an undeniable sense of duty toward this stranger. With gentle care, they lifted the human and carried him to Relia and Joran's home, where he was laid on a spare bed. Aria, who had been watching from the doorway, felt a strange pull as she looked upon the wounded warrior. Though they were worlds apart, something in him resonated deeply within her, a spark she could not fully understand. Days passed as the human recovered. Aria took it upon herself to tend to him, bringing him water, whispering stories of their village, and describing the beauty of Oriel. Her gentle words seemed to reach him in his restless sleep, soothing his pain. She found herself captivated by this mysterious visitor, drawn to the strength that lingered in his silent form. Finally, on the 5th day, the warrior opened his eyes. They were a deep, piercing blue, carrying a gaze that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 stories. His eyes met Aria's, and for a moment neither spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice weak but firm. Aria managed a small smile, her hand instinctively reaching out to steady him. "You're safe. Our village found you wounded in the square. We brought you here to heal." The human nodded, his eyes not leaving hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "My name is Cal. I am a soldier, from Earth. I don't know how I ended up here, but I owe you my life." Aria's heart skipped a beat. She felt an unfamiliar warmth spread within her chest, a sense of connection that she had never felt before. "My name is Aria," she replied, a gentle tremor in her voice. "We will help you get better." As Cal recovered, Aria spent more time by his side, finding in him a sense of understanding that was as comforting as it was new. She told him stories of her village, shared tales of Oriel's legendary creatures, and spoke of her dreams to see worlds beyond her own. In turn, Cal shared stories of Earth, of towering mountains, boundless oceans, and forests that stretched as far as the eye could see. With every word exchanged, Arya felt her heart open, her quiet world expanding beyond the limits of her imagination. Despite her gentle nature, she held a courage that surprised even her. Her once fragile spirit began to grow stronger, fueled by a newfound purpose that blossomed with Kael's presence. Yet, the villagers were watchful, their whispers growing with each day. Though they were grateful to Kael for surviving, they worried about what his arrival might bring. Arya's parents, who had always dreamed of a simple life for their daughter, began to question the influence this human warrior might have on her. They saw the light in her eyes, a spark that had not been there before, and with it came a new worry. Relia voiced her concerns to Joran late one night, her voice heavy with doubt. "What if Arya becomes attached to him?" she asked, her words laced with fear. "She's been so happy, but what if this only leads to heartbreak?" Joran took a deep breath, his heart torn between his love for his daughter and the duty to protect her. "We cannot shield her from every sorrow, Relia. She has a right to her own path, to the happiness she finds, and the risks that come with it." Relia nodded, though her heart was far from at ease. She knew that Arya was drawn to Kael, that their daughter's quiet life had been forever altered. But she could not bring herself to take this new joy from her, even if it carried an edge of danger. Under the soft glow of Oriel's twin moons, Arya and Kael's bond deepened. Together, they spent long evenings under the stars, their hands close but never touching, the energy between them alive with possibilities. Kael had seen worlds at war, but in Arya, he found a sense of peace he had not known in years. And for Arya, Kael represented a world of wonder and strength that called to her like a distant melody. One night, as they sat beneath the stars, Arya's heart finally spoke. "Tell me, Kael, what is it like to fight for your world?" she asked, her voice soft yet filled with awe. Kael turned to her, his gaze intense and thoughtful. "It's hard, Arya, but it's worth it. The love for one's home, for one's people, it drives us to fight even when the odds are against us. I didn't know if I would survive, but here, with you, I feel something I never thought I'd feel again." A quiet smile graced Arya's face, her cheeks warming as Kael's words sank in. She could feel her heart opening, a surge of hope that defied the doubts that had once bound her. As the night deepened, they sat in silence, gazing up at the endless expanse above. Neither knew what the future held or how their story would unfold. But in that moment, under the stars of Oriel, they found a connection that transcended the borders of worlds, a bond that, despite the challenges ahead, neither of them was willing to let go. In the quiet shadows of their home, Relia and Joran looked on, torn between their fears and the undeniable happiness they saw in their daughter. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, and that Arya and Kael's journey was just beginning. But for now, they allowed themselves to hope, to believe in the possibility of love in a world of infinite unknowns. A bond beyond worlds. The weeks passed quietly, and Kael's strength returned bit by bit. Life in Lyris resumed its calm rhythm, though the presence of the human warrior cast a subtle, persistent ripple through the village. Most of the villagers avoided Kael, their gazes a mix of awe and worriness, for no one knew what his arrival would mean for them. Yet, despite the caution around him, Kael found solace in Arya's company. For her, he was not a symbol of danger or mystery but a friend, someone who made her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. Each day, Kael and Arya spent hours together, exploring the surrounding fields and forests. Arya had always known every path, every stream, and every secret nook, but seeing them through Kael's eyes breathed new life into her world. His tales of earth, of mountains that touched the skies and oceans that stretched beyond sight, painted dreams of faraway lands that left her heart racing. And in return, she shared the beauty of her own world with him. One crisp morning, they sat by a quiet riverbank, the sunlight filtering through the trees, casting playful patterns on the water. Kael observed her as she sat with her feet dipped in the cool water, her gaze lost in thought. Arya, he said softly, breaking the silence, have you ever wanted to leave this village? She looked up, meeting his steady gaze, her expression pensive. I have, she replied, her voice a mere whisper. For as long as I can remember, I've dreamed of seeing what lies beyond the hills, of exploring worlds as vast as the ones you've described. She paused, a wistful smile tugging at her lips. But I know my limitations, Kale. My body, it holds me back. The villagers see me as fragile, as someone who needs protection. And maybe they're right. Kale frowned, his brows knitting in determination. You're stronger than anyone here, Arya, he said firmly. Strength isn't just about physical abilities. It's in your spirit, in the way you see beauty in everything around you. If anything, you're the bravest person I've met. Her cheeks flushed at his words, but her gaze softened as she looked at him. You really believe that? She asked, her voice barely audible over the gentle sound of the river. Kale nodded. I do. And I think you deserve to follow your dreams, to see the stars you've always watched from afar. He hesitated, his gaze shifting to the horizon. Maybe, one day, I can take you there. The possibility hung between them, a fragile, hopeful thread connecting their worlds. Arya's heart raced at the thought, her dreams of distant stars feeling closer than ever. But as much as she longed to believe, a sliver of doubt lingered, reminding her of the constraints that had shaped her life. That evening, Kel and Arya returned to the village under a setting sun, its golden light casting long shadows across the fields. But as they approached, they sensed an unusual tension in the air. A gathering had formed in the village square, and voices murmured in tones of concern and suspicion. The villagers had finally grown uneasy with the humans' prolonged stay, and fears were beginning to stir. Relia and Joran, standing among the others, shared worried glances as they saw Kale and Arya approach. Relia's gaze lingered on her daughter, concern etched deeply into her features. She knew that Arya's heart was already bound to this human stranger, that his presence had changed her in ways that could not be undone. But the village elders were of a different mind, their faces solemn as they addressed the gathered crowd. One of the elders, a tall man named Taran, stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with caution. We do not doubt the kindness of our village, nor our duty to help those in need, he began, his gaze fixed on Kale. But we must protect our people and our ways. We know little of this human and his purpose here. His world is not ours, and his presence could bring unknown dangers. Kale held his ground, though he felt the weight of their distrust bearing down on him. He understood their caution. He, too, had seen the shadows of war, and he knew the fear that came with the unknown. But it was Arya who surprised him. She stepped forward, her chin raised, her voice calm but unwavering. Kale is no threat to us, she said, her words clear and resolute. He came here by accident, injured and alone. And we are a people of kindness, of compassion. I ask you to see him as I do, not as a stranger, but as someone who has given me hope. The villagers exchanged uncertain glances, murmuring among themselves. Some nodded in agreement, softened by Arya's words, but others remained wary, their gazes darting to the elders for guidance. Taran's expression softened slightly, but he addressed Arya with gentle caution. Arya, you speak with a heart full of compassion, but this world is vast and full of dangers. It is our duty to protect one another. Your feelings are strong, but they may lead you down a path of hardship. Arya did not flinch, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. I understand the risks, but Kale has shown me a world beyond this village, a world of strength and resilience. He deserves the same chance we would give anyone among us. Relia and Joran stood close, torn between their love for their daughter and their loyalty to the village. They knew how much Arya's life had changed since Kale's arrival, how her dreams had grown from mere fantasies to tangible possibilities. But they also knew the strength of the village's traditions, the cautious wisdom that had safeguarded them for generations. Joran stepped forward, his voice carrying a tone of calm authority. Arya has found hope in Kale, and he has shown respect for our ways. Let us not let fear cloud our judgment. Let us allow Kale to stay, on the condition that he respects our ways and shares his knowledge with us." Taran regarded Joran's words thoughtfully, the murmur of agreement rippling through the crowd. Finally, he nodded, relenting with a sense of quiet dignity. "Very well, Kale may remain, but he must abide by our customs. And Arya, you must understand the risks of forming bonds with someone from a different world. This choice is yours alone, but we will not protect you from the consequences." Relieved, Kale gave a respectful nod to the villagers. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "I promise I mean no harm, and I am grateful for the kindness you've shown me. I will respect your ways." Arya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She knew that this fragile truce was far from acceptance, but it was a chance. A chance to show the village that Kel's presence was not a danger but a gift. And as the villagers slowly dispersed, she allowed herself to hope that their bond might bridge the gap between their worlds. In the days that followed, Kel took it upon himself to repay the villagers' kindness. He shared stories of Earth's struggles and victories, tales of resilience that resonated with those who listened. The villagers, initially wary, found themselves drawn to his stories, the honesty in his words, and the depth of his experiences. Arya's heart soared with pride as she watched Kel interact with her people. He had become a part of her world, not as an outsider, but as someone who valued its beauty and simplicity. And in his presence, she felt a new confidence blossom within her, a belief in herself, in her dreams, and in the possibility of a future that reached beyond the hills of Lyris. Yet, despite the progress, a shadow lingered. Not everyone had accepted Kel's presence, and whispers of doubt continued to ripple through the village. But Arya refused to let those whispers overshadow the light that Kel had brought into her life. She knew that they were at the beginning of a journey, one filled with unknowns and challenges. As the sun set over the village, casting a warm glow over the fields, Arya and Kale stood together, side by side, gazing at the stars that had once seemed so distant. In that quiet moment, they found strength in each other, a shared resolve that bound them together in a world of infinite possibilities. With hearts united, they knew that, together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as they watched the night sky, they allowed themselves to dream, to hope, and to believe that love could indeed bridge the vastness of worlds. The shadows of doubt. Days passed in Lyris, and a fragile sense of calm settled over the village. Kale had gradually found his place among the villagers, helping with repairs, offering his strength in tasks that required an extra hand, and sharing knowledge from his travels. While his stories and kindness slowly chipped away at the lingering skepticism, not all were convinced. There remained a shadow of distrust, one that whispered of hidden dangers and unknown consequences. Arya felt the tension in the air, but focused on the positive. With Kel's encouragement, she pushed herself to explore the edges of her abilities, testing her limits in small ways. Together, they took long walks through the forest, and Kel showed her stretches and exercises to strengthen her legs and improve her balance. Each day, she grew stronger, her confidence building with each step. It was as if her once constricted world had been set free, boundaries dissolving with each new experience. One afternoon, Kel and Arya stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast valley. The gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, and the golden light bathed the landscape in warmth. For Arya, it was a rare moment of feeling invincible. She stood tall beside Kel, her heart racing with exhilaration as she took in the beauty of her world. "I never thought I'd see this," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Kel glanced at her, a smile playing at his lips. "You're stronger than you know, Arya. This world has so much for you to experience, and who knows? Maybe one day you'll see even more." Arya's gaze lingered on the horizon, her mind spinning with dreams of worlds she had only heard about in Kel's stories. Yet, as thrilling as those dreams were, a sense of unease tugged at her heart. She knew that not everyone in the village shared her excitement for Kel's presence. In the quiet moments, she caught glimpses of villagers exchanging worried glances, whispers of doubt following them as they walked by. And while she tried to ignore it, a part of her feared that their fragile peace would not hold. As they made their way back to the village, they noticed a familiar figure waiting by the path. Arin, a young villager and one of Arya's childhood friends. Arin was a loyal friend, always there to lend a helping hand, but his expression was clouded with concern as he approached them. Arya, Kel, Arin greeted them, his voice polite but tense. He cast a wary glance at Kel before looking back at Arya. "May I speak with you privately?" Arya felt a pang of anxiety at the request, but she nodded, turning to Kel. "I'll catch up with you in a moment," she said, offering him a reassuring smile. Kel nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he walked ahead, leaving them alone. As soon as he was out of earshot, Arin turned to Arya, his face etched with worry. "Arya," he began, his tone gentle but serious, "I care about you. I always have. But I don't understand why you're so close to him. He's from another world, a dangerous world. We don't know what he could bring upon us." Arya took a deep breath, meeting Arin's gaze with steady determination. "Kel is no threat, Arin. He's shown nothing but kindness, and he's helped our village more than once. I trust him." Arin sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But do you really know him? He's shared stories, yes, but that doesn't mean we know his intentions. What if he brings danger to Lyris, or worse, to you?" She felt the weight of his words settle on her, but her heart remained resolute. "I believe in him, Arin. He's helped me see parts of myself I never thought possible. I don't expect everyone to understand, but I won't abandon him just because he's different." Arin's expression softened, though a trace of sadness lingered in his eyes. "I only want you to be safe, Arya. We all do. Just be careful. Promise me." She nodded, offering him a gentle smile. "I promise, Arin." As she walked back to join Kel, Arya couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her heart. She knew Arin's concerns came from a place of care, but they mirrored the quiet worries that had been gnawing at her mind. Was she, in her hope and trust, ignoring a danger that lay unseen? The thought lingered, casting a faint shadow over her heart. That evening, as the village gathered around a fire, Kel shared another of his stories. His voice carried a calm strength as he spoke of Earth's struggles, the bravery of its people, and the challenges they faced. Arya watched the faces of the villagers, noting the glimmers of admiration mixed with the lingering traces of doubt. When the story ended, an elderly woman named Mara, known for her sharp wit and wisdom, stepped forward. "Your stories are impressive, Kel," she said, her tone respectful but probing. "But they make me wonder, why did you come here, to this quiet village on our small planet?" Kel hesitated, glancing briefly at Arya before answering. "I came here by accident. My ship was attacked, and I barely escaped. When I woke up, I was here, surrounded by your kindness." He paused, his gaze solemn. "But if I'm honest, I found more here than I expected. Your village, it feels like home." The villagers murmured softly, some nodding while others looked unconvinced. Mara regarded him thoughtfully, her gaze piercing. "And what will happen when you decide to leave, Kel? You're a warrior. Surely you'll be called back to your world." Arya's heart skipped a beat, the question one she had dared not consider. She turned to Kel, watching him intently as he answered. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, his voice steady but soft. "But for now I am here, and I promise I mean no harm to anyone." The night wore on, the fire crackling as shadows danced around them. Despite Kel's sincerity, the air was heavy with unspoken questions. Arya sensed the growing tension, a fragile thread pulling at the trust they had worked so hard to build. As the villagers dispersed, Arya and Kel lingered by the fire, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. Finally, Kel turned to her, his expression troubled. "I feel like I've brought a storm to your quiet life," he said, his voice filled with regret. Arya shook her head, reaching out to place her hand on his arm. "No, Kel. You've shown me a world beyond these hills. You've given me hope." He managed a faint smile, but his eyes were shadowed. "Still, I worry. For you, for your people. I know what it's like to be feared, to be an outsider. And I don't want that for you." She held his gaze, her heart pounding. "Cale, you are not an outsider to me. You've shown me strength I never knew I had. No matter what others say, I believe in you." They sat in silence, side by side, watching the fire burn low. Arya knew that her bond with Cale was a precious gift, but she also knew it came at a cost. She could sense the fear and uncertainty growing around them, a shadow threatening to drive a wedge between her and the life she had always known. As dawn approached, they made their way back to her family's home. Cale paused at the door, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Arya. For everything," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. She nodded, her heart aching as she watched him disappear into the quiet morning light. She knew that whatever lay ahead, she could not turn back. The bond they shared was stronger than the whispers of doubt, stronger than the shadows of fear. And even as uncertainty loomed, she held on to the hope that their connection could withstand whatever trials awaited them. But deep down, she knew that this was only the beginning of their journey, and that the path before them was fraught with challenges they had yet to face. As she lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the village, she allowed herself to dream of a world where love and understanding bridged the gap between their two worlds, of a future where fear could no longer hold them back. And with that hope, she drifted into a restless sleep, her heart both heavy and light, waiting for the dawn of a new day. Trials of the heart. The following days were filled with tension, as whispers of doubt seemed to seep into every corner of Lyris. Cale continued to lend his strength and knowledge, helping the villagers in ways both big and small. But beneath the surface, a sense of caution lingered, as if an invisible line had been drawn between Cale and the rest of the village. Arya felt this tension acutely, but she refused to let it tarnish her growing connection with Cale. Every day, she found herself drawn to his side, her heart racing with the possibilities that seemed to blossom whenever they were together. And yet, there was a weight on her heart, a quiet fear that this fragile peace could be shattered at any moment. One evening, as the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, Cale approached Arya's family's home. He looked troubled, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with an unseen burden. Arya, sensing his unease, invited him to join her in the quiet garden behind the house. "What's on your mind, Cale?" she asked softly, her gaze full of concern. He hesitated, looking out over the softly glowing flowers that lit up the garden in hues of blue and purple under the twin moons. "Arya," he began, his voice low, "I've been thinking about what Mara said, about my place here, and what will happen if I have to leave." Arya's heart clenched at the words, her mind flashing with the unspoken fear she had buried deep within herself. "Are you thinking of leaving?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Cale looked at her, his eyes filled with a blend of regret and affection. "No, not unless I have to. But I also can't ignore the reality of my situation. I came here by accident, and one day I may have to face the obligations that come with my past." He paused, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "But I don't want to leave, Arya. This place, you have given me a peace I haven't felt in years." Arya reached out, placing her hand on his. "Then stay. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together. I've lived my whole life being told what I can't do, but being with you has shown me that there is more to this world than the walls others place around us." Cale smiled, but the worry in his eyes remained. "If I stay, Arya, you know it will not be easy. The villagers are still wary, and I don't blame them. I am an outsider here. They've welcomed me, but they still fear the unknown, and I am that unknown." Her gaze hardened with determination. "Then let's prove to them that there's nothing to fear. Show them who you are, Cale. Show them your strength, your kindness. I believe in you, and I think, deep down, they will too." Moved by her conviction, Cale took her hand in his grip firm but gentle. Then we'll do it together, he whispered, his voice filled with quiet resolve. In that moment, under the soft light of the moons, they shared a silent promise, a commitment to face whatever trials lay ahead, side by side. The opportunity to test that promise came sooner than they expected. The very next day, an unexpected storm swept across Lyris. The skies darkened, and the winds howled, sending debris flying and threatening the village's crops and homes. The villagers scrambled to secure their belongings, rushing to protect the fields and livestock that were their lifeblood. Kale, without hesitation, threw himself into the effort, working alongside the villagers to shore up the barriers around the fields and brace the weaker structures. Arya watched him with a sense of pride and admiration as he moved with purpose, his strength and resilience evident with every task he undertook. He worked tirelessly, shoulder to shoulder with those who had once looked at him with suspicion. Together, they fought against the storm, their efforts united by a shared goal. At one point, Arin, who had been openly skeptical of Kel's presence, found himself struggling to hold down a section of the fence against the relentless wind. Kale was by his side in an instant, bracing the fence with his own strength, their combined efforts saving the crops from destruction. Arin looked at Kale, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he managed, his voice almost lost in the howling wind. Kale simply nodded, his focus unwavering as he continued to help where he was needed. In that moment, a subtle shift took place, as if the storm itself had washed away a fraction of the doubt that had lingered between them. The storm raged on into the night, and Kel did not rest until the worst had passed. Exhausted but unbroken, he returned to Arya's home, where she waited for him, her eyes filled with relief and pride. "You were amazing," she whispered, embracing him tightly. "Thank you for helping us." Kel returned the embrace, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. "It was my duty, Arya. I couldn't just stand by." In the days that followed the storm, the villagers' attitudes toward Kel began to soften. They had seen his dedication firsthand, his willingness to work alongside them without hesitation or expectation of gratitude. While some remained cautious, others began to see him as more than an outsider. They saw him as someone who, despite his differences, shared in their struggles and their hopes. Yet, as Arya's connection with Kel deepened, so too did the whispers of concern among the elders. Taran, who had been hesitant from the beginning, grew increasingly vocal, cautioning the village about the risks of forming close ties with someone from another world. His voice echoed through the village, sowing seeds of doubt that began to take root even among those who had begun to trust Kale. One evening, Taran called a gathering in the village square, urging everyone to attend. Arya and Kale arrived together, sensing the tension in the air. The villagers gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on Taran as he addressed the crowd. "We have always been a village of peace, of simplicity," Taran began, his voice steady but filled with gravity. "We have welcomed Kale into our community with kindness, and he has repaid us with hard work and dedication. But we cannot ignore the risks. He comes from a world filled with violence, with wars we cannot understand. We do not know what forces may follow him, what dangers may lurk in the shadows." Arya felt a surge of anger rise within her, but before she could speak, Kel stepped forward, his expression calm but resolute. He met Taran's gaze, unflinching. "I understand your concerns, Taran," Kel said, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "I come from a world where conflict is a reality, but that does not define me. I came here by accident, seeking nothing but survival, and in your kindness, you offered me a place. I am here not as a threat, but as a friend. I have no intention of bringing harm to this village, only to protect and respect it as you have done for me." The villagers murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, while others remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Taran's gaze softened slightly, but his caution did not waver. "And what of Arya?" Taran pressed, his tone growing sharper. "She is one of us, yet she has bound herself to someone from a different world. How can we be sure that this bond will not bring her sorrow or danger?" Arya could remain silent no longer. She stepped forward, her voice filled with determination. Kale has shown me more kindness and respect than I have ever known. He has given me the courage to believe in myself, to dream beyond the walls that others have placed around me. Our bond is not a threat. It is a bridge, one that shows that love and understanding can overcome any barrier. Her words resonated, a quiet but powerful declaration that left the crowd silent. For a moment, there was no sound but the soft rustling of the trees in the evening breeze. Taran, though unmoved, nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Very well, Arya. If this is the path you choose, then we will respect it. But know this, we will protect our village, no matter the cost." With that, Taran turned and walked away, leaving the gathering in silence. The villagers began to disperse, some casting sympathetic glances at Arya and Kale, while others walked away in silence, their faces clouded with uncertainty. As the last of the villagers left, Arya turned to Kale, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and determination. "No matter what they say, I won't let go of what we have," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Kale took her hand, his gaze steady and filled with warmth. "And I won't let anything come between us, Arya. Whatever trials we face, we'll face them together." In that moment, under the quiet night sky, they shared a silent vow, a promise that their bond would endure, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. They knew the path before them would be fraught with challenges, that the shadows of doubt and fear would linger. But with hearts united, they felt ready to face whatever trials awaited, believing in the power of love to bridge even the vastness of worlds. A test of loyalty. The days that followed were a delicate dance between peace and tension. While some villagers had come to appreciate Kale's presence and the strength he brought to their community, others continued to regard him with suspicion. Yet despite the underlying divide, Kale remained steadfast, carrying out his duties with quiet dignity. He helped rebuild damaged parts of the village, worked tirelessly alongside the farmers, and even taught the children small tricks and exercises, earning shy smiles and laughter. Arya watched Kale with a mixture of pride and concern. She had never felt so alive, so hopeful, yet the undercurrents of unease in the village weighed heavily on her heart. Every glance of suspicion cast in Kale's direction was a reminder of the fragile peace they were balancing. Still, Kale's patience and resilience inspired her, and she drew strength from his quiet resolve. One morning, as Arya and Kale made their way through the village square, a familiar voice called out to them. It was Mara, the elder who had questioned Kale's intentions from the start. Her expression was softer than usual, yet her eyes held a quiet determination. "Kale, Arya," she greeted them, her tone respectful but firm. "I would like to ask something of you." Kale inclined his head, meeting her gaze with respectful curiosity. "Of course, Mara. How can we help?" Mara gestured toward the distant mountains, where the shadows of towering peaks stretched across the horizon. "There is an old shrine, hidden high in the mountains. It was built long before any of us were born, a place our ancestors used to visit for guidance and reflection. It is said that anyone who can make the journey there and back will have proven their loyalty to the village." Arya's heart skipped a beat. She had heard stories of the shrine, but had never dared to visit it. The path was treacherous, winding through dense forests and steep cliffs. Only the strongest and most determined of villagers had ever attempted the journey, and it was regarded as a test of both strength and spirit. Mara's gaze shifted between Arya and Kale. "If you truly wish to remain a part of this village, Kale, this journey will prove your dedication. It is not a demand, but an opportunity, one that will show the village your loyalty." Arya felt a surge of protectiveness, but Kale placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his expression calm. "I accept the challenge, Mara. If this is what the village needs to trust me, then I will make the journey." Mara nodded, respect evident in her eyes. "Arya, you are welcome to join him, if you wish. But understand that the path is dangerous, and not everyone who attempts it returns." Arya looked at Kale, her resolve unwavering. "I will go with him. We will face this together." With preparations complete, Arya and Kale set out at dawn the next day. The villagers gathered to see them off, a mix of curiosity and silent respect in their expressions. Relia and Joran hugged Arya tightly, their worry clear but tempered by faith in their daughter's strength. The journey began with a gentle ascent through the thick forest, the morning sunlight casting dappled patterns on the ground. Birds chirped overhead, and the crisp scent of pine filled the air, a comforting reminder of home. But as they ventured higher, the landscape grew rugged, the trees thinning as they approached the steeper parts of the mountain. Hours passed as they navigated rocky slopes and narrow paths that hugged the mountainside. Kale moved with practiced ease, guiding Arya over challenging terrain and offering his hand whenever the path became treacherous. She marveled at his quiet strength, his focus unwavering even as they faced the daunting climb. As the day wore on, they reached a small plateau where they paused to rest. Arya leaned against a boulder, catching her breath, her legs aching from the climb. Kale sat beside her, offering a gentle smile. "You're doing well," he said, his voice warm with encouragement. "Not everyone would make it this far." She managed a small smile, despite the exhaustion creeping into her bones. "I wouldn't be here without you, Kale. You've given me a strength I never knew I had." They shared a quiet moment, the wind whispering through the trees, the vast expanse of the valley stretching out below them. In that serene silence, Arya felt a surge of gratitude for Kale, for the path they had taken together, and for the hope he had brought into her life. Their rest was interrupted by a sudden rustling in the bushes nearby. Instinctively, Kale moved in front of Arya, his stance protective. From the shadows emerged a pack of creatures native to the mountains, wolf-like beasts with silver fur and piercing yellow eyes. They were known to be territorial and often aggressive, especially when intruders ventured too close to their dens. Kale's gaze sharpened as he assessed the situation. "Arya, stay close to me," he whispered, his voice steady but tense. The leader of the pack let out a low growl, its sharp teeth bared as it advanced. Kale held his ground, his body poised, ready to defend them if necessary. Arya's heart raced, fear tightening her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm, drawing strength from Kale's steady presence. In one swift movement, Kale reached for a sturdy branch nearby, wielding it as a makeshift weapon. The pack circled them, their growls growing louder, but Kale's gaze remained locked on the leader, his stance unwavering. With a sharp cry, he struck the ground, the sound startling the creatures and causing them to hesitate. Seizing the opportunity, Kale held his ground, his voice calm but firm. "We mean no harm, we're just passing through." For a tense moment, the leader stared at Kale, as if assessing his intent. Then, with a final snarl, it turned and retreated, the rest of the pack following reluctantly. Arya let out a shaky breath, her heart pounding with both fear and relief. "You were amazing," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Kale shrugged, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Just a bit of experience with stubborn creatures, but let's keep moving. We're not far from the shrine." They continued their ascent, the encounter with the wolves a reminder of the wild, untamed beauty of the mountains. By the time they reached the shrine, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the ancient stone structure nestled against the cliff. The shrine was simple but beautiful, adorned with carvings of stars and constellations, symbols of guidance and hope. Together, they knelt before the shrine, offering a silent prayer. Arya felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a feeling that she had been searching for all her life. In that moment, she realized that this journey was not just a test of loyalty for Kale, it was a testament to the strength of their bond, a connection that transcended the doubts and fears that had once held her back. As they made their way back down the mountain, they moved with a renewed sense of purpose. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had also strengthened their resolve, a quiet certainty growing between them. They were no longer bound by the opinions of others, no longer limited by the fears that had once defined them. Together, they were unstoppable. When they finally returned to the village, exhausted but triumphant, they were met with a crowd of villagers waiting in the square. The elders stood at the forefront, their expressions a mix of surprise and respect. Taran stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Kale. "You completed the journey," he said, his voice filled with quiet awe. "You've shown a strength and resilience that few possess." Kale inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, Taran. I only wanted to prove my loyalty to the village and to Arya." The villagers murmured among themselves, many nodding in approval. Even those who had once been skeptical seemed to regard Kel with newfound respect, their doubts softened by the journey he had undertaken to prove himself. Mara stepped forward, her expression softened by a smile. "You've earned our trust, Kale. Welcome, truly, as one of us." As the villagers dispersed, Arya and Kale stood together, a quiet sense of triumph filling the air around them. They had faced the challenges set before them, and in doing so, they had forged a bond stronger than any doubt or fear. Hand in hand, they walked toward the setting sun, their hearts filled with hope for the future. For the first time, Arya felt free, not only from the limitations of her own body, but from the expectations and judgments of others. She had chosen her own path, and it led her to a life filled with courage, resilience, and love. And as they walked together, the village watching them with admiration and acceptance, they knew that they had finally found a place they could both call home.